recording correctly, and this will be one of our probably last videos of the semester that I should have posted on 4/27, and it's going to be regarding our final paper prompt, which has been up on our module sections for quite a while now. So I highly recommend, if we have finished our readings, then we should probably start working on our paper. It's not meant to be too difficult of an assignment, but basically, like, all of our homeworks have had a purpose, which is getting this practice of writing, for about a page, single space, and most of us have gotten better. The last homeworks were excellent on the president. Trying to get feedback and to everyone. And one second. And I think if we do the papers now, and you are your critical thought responses are ready to go, then this homework assignment, or excuse me, this paper assignment will not be as difficult as if I've gotten a few emails that some of us think that they might be. So here we go. So final paper. Here's my sense of humor, as per always. So standard fare. 1-inch margins on your papers, double spaced, 12 font, Times New Roman. It's very, very important that we do this. You will be marked down points if you do not. The reason for this really isn't, I think I never understood why professors ask students to do this. It's for uniformity of papers, so that we know that you are all writing basically the same amount, so we're treating everyone fairly. 6 to 8 pages in length. Usually with the intro class, I don't have too many issues with people going over. Try to get as close to 6 as you can. And if you're at, 5, if you're on the 5th page, let me put it another way. If you're on the 6th page, but you only have half the page, that's not 6 total pages, right? That's 5.5. So keep that in mind. So here we have a few resources for everyone to use for citations and things like that. It's not a big deal. Again, no outside sources. I had a few issues this semester with people, but those people, to their credit, got back to me and redid their work. So good job. But don't rely on anything outside this. So again, the homeworks and this paper is much more concerned with what do you think, like what's going on up here. I'm more interested in your views and your capacity to take all these lessons we've learned throughout the semester and apply them to a paper. And again, if it's not clear, and I'll get to the prompt right now, the paper is just basically make up your own new amendment to the Constitution. We'll call it the 28th Amendment. In fact, I should probably name this assignment better in the future. And this is an older format I have. I think I have the updated one for you guys. This is from RCC. Obviously, you guys are at College of the Desert, so I apologize for that. There might be a few typos like that. You just change the prompt a little bit for whatever place you happen to be teaching at any given time. So the document's basically the same. And here what you'll notice is then we start getting the paper directions. And I'm just going to go through this and help you all start thinking about it. And again, basically you want to come up with your own amendment to the Constitution. But I'll go through the questions and talk about what kinds of things you should do. Before I get started, I would say it's better to think on a smaller scale, something particular. You're not trying to convince me of anything. I don't care about your political views in a good way. But it's critical to not try and do too much, right? So when you look at you should actually go probably read the amendments we have. It's the Second Amendment. It deals with guns, just deals with that issue. The 19th Amendment, instituting the natural right of women to vote, let's say. So basically amendments are to fix problems, fix mistakes in the Constitution of the country, but trying to have some of these bigger fixes perhaps be more difficult to write about, but that's all entirely up to you. You want to be able to express yourself well. So central component of this assignment, your paper should proceed in 4 sections. And so basically I've basically written these directions to help you. These are guiding questions. I had a student email me oh, it's a lot. It's very overwhelming. Don't feel that way. These are different sections. You could divide the paper up into 4 parts, right? So, a little bit over a page per part, maybe. And just be effective, be efficient, and take these lessons on with all the other papers you happen to write going forward. There's no need to let these sections be an obstacle. I wrote them in such a way as to try and help everybody. Okay, let's see. So here we have section 1. So after your intro paragraph. So your intro paragraphs are very, very important. I'll grade off of these. But what I mean is you need to encapsulate what the paper's about. So imagine you were going, if it wasn't quarantine, you're going to Starbucks, and you were going to explain to somebody you had this assignment, like how would you explain it to them? Well, what do you talk about? So that's what I'm looking for in intro paragraph. So you basically say you address the reader, me, as if I'm not knowledgeable, and then you go on to say things like where you're basically restating the prompt, and so you want to make it clear that you're writing about a new amendment proposal. So you want to say that at some point. You want to avoid fancy language. You don't want to say like after many years of consideration, it is clear we need another 28th Amendment. Like this is not an English class, and this is going to be a hard lesson for a lot of you going forward. It's a political thought class, political science class, and I'm interested in your thoughts. And so I just need to know what the paper's about. So you're just going to redo the prompt. This paper occurs in 4 sections. The first section talks about this. The second section talks about this. The third, the fourth. That's what an introduction paragraph is. Okay. So you want to briefly lay out the political problem you believe needs to be better addressed in the U.S. Why is it a problem? Explain this issue in such a way that a person with no knowledge, what I just talked about, of this topic could come to understand it in its seriousness. Who is the issue affecting currently? In what ways is the problem not being adequately addressed by the Constitution, by the framework that exists? You may provide facts and figures. Believe it if you think it'll help. So you can use some facts, outside source, but I would just avoid it. If you're not sure, email me. I'll let you know. Don't use any news source. I would say if you're going to use government statistical websites, the Census Bureau, the Department of Labor, do not use news sites like Vox or Fox News. Just stay away from all that stuff altogether. The Wikipedia, YouTube. Okay, so in considering section 1, basically what I'm asking is, what are some problems? And so we know, looking at the amendments themselves, we've had amendments. I should have these probably memorized, but we've had amendments that saw a problem. So let's take alcohol. Alcohol was viewed as a problem in the United States for a very long time. It was seen as causing domestic violence. Men would come back from their very much more labor-intensive jobs, like coal mining or whatever, industrial work, steel work, and they would drink. And they were coming from cultures at a time in the late 1800s, 1900s, where you would drink, and people act stupid when they have alcohol, and so the societies at the time, or the temperance movement, saw this as like, well, this is a cause for divorces, this is a cause for domestic violence, and so we can eliminate all of these social ills and create more justice if we outlaw alcohol. So we know that happened in 1929. It's the Roaring Twenties, and so in 1929 it gets passed, and prohibition is, I think it's someone can double check, maybe it's not 1929, but that around that time period. And so what happened from that then is we get the Al Capones and organized crime, and they're like, well, if you're going to make it illegal, then we'll just give it to people anyways, which caused a whole bevy of other problems like murders and people still drinking. And now they were drinking essentially true poison, where that was one of the issues with, say, moonshining. There's a show on Discovery Channel about moonshining, and the reason why that's illegal is because it's not regulated. And so do you really know you're drinking alcohol that you can drink safely and not bleach? It's like we don't like government until it stops us from dying of coronavirus or drinking bleach. So these are things to keep in mind. And so we know we had an amendment that outlawed alcohol with prohibition, and then we had an amendment that was like, that did not work. We're going to get rid of that. And so again, I would highly recommend looking at the different amendments. We have amendments that say soldiers can't go into your house. We have amendments that say that you are entitled to protections if you get arrested. We have amendments that get rid of slavery. That's probably the biggest, most important one, arguably, in the amendments. And so I would say ending slavery is a big scale problem, whereas alcohol probably isn't as big, although it's big. And so things that you could think about might be global warming or universal health care, or maybe outlawing particular kinds of guns, or some of you probably have issues with free speech. Maybe you can modify amendments, you can get rid of amendments, you can add amendments. I've had interesting papers with this assignment. Some students have talked about, like, I want to have a constitutional requirement for child daycare. So, and you put the language in there. So you want to model your language off of the amendments to the Constitution. So it's like, okay, well, if you're going to say like the country has to have child daycare, you're probably going to have to say like, well, and there must be tax revenue to support this or that. Maybe we should go to Mars. Maybe we should have no space exploration. Maybe we should have open borders. Maybe we should, so again, like, pretty much anything's on the table. If you're not sure, if you don't think it's a good one, email me and we can talk about it. But usually I have things that are like very just generally topical. Most of us end up talking about abortion issues, gun issues, things like that. Totally fine. I would say just treat those issues fairly. But I also have gotten really interesting ones that I just never would have thought of. Like everyone gets an arts education or something like that. And so we're not lawyers. We're not actual politicians. So pretty much as long as you're being reasonable, I'll accept anything you want to have as a potential thing. The important thing with section 1 is you want to be able to articulate this part right here. Why is it a problem? So like, why is it a problem? Obviously, some things are more obvious, like climate change or being sick and not having health care, but you want to be able to explain, be sure you're addressing some problem. Not just like, well, I just think everyone should have money. I just think everyone should have free money. Like that's not going to be a good amendment, right? Okay, on to the next one. So here we have in section 2. Here you will want to write your amendment out, basically. Do this in the same legal style as that president in the enshrined amendments. Your constitutional amendment may range from all this different stuff I was talking about, so I got ahead of myself a little bit. So the main thing in this section is make sure you italicize and bold what your actual amendment is, and it shouldn't be. It needs to be at least a couple sentences and no more than a couple paragraphs. So I don't need like 2 pages of like this amendment. If you go again look at the different amendments in the Constitution, then you'll see that some of them are really really long and some of them are really really short. So there are reasons for these things. Here we have, subsequently, you will need to explain what your amendment means in plain terms. So again, just don't say like, well, I'm going to fix climate change. Like, what does that mean? And, assume I don't know what climate change is. Let's see. Here I even have for an example. For instance, if you think we should have universal health care, what does universal mean? What does health care mean? Now, again, it sounds silly, but I was, when I first came up with this assignment, I was having a discussion with my dad. And he was like, well, I'm not for universal health care, but he didn't actually really understand what the word universal meant. So I explained it to him. I don't know if I changed his mind, but it changed the nature of the conversation because he just didn't understand that universal, and maybe you don't know, just means everyone is covered. It covers everyone universally. So it's more of an expression. It doesn't apply to like the universe or anything like that. As a part of your explanation, be sure to elaborate on how this proposed amendment will fix the problem. So you had the problem in section 1. And section 2 is like, okay, here's my amendment, and then this is how it's going to fix that problem I told you about earlier. How would your amendment improve this problem? In what ways does your proposed amendment work to promote greater justice and improve American life? Some guiding questions. So, like, how's it going to fix the problem? Why is this better than without the amendment, basically, is what I'm asking. Would your amendment fully address the issue, or does more legislation need to occur as well? We're going over in the theory class Barry Goldwater. And one of the things that this conservative thinker from the 60s is talking about is states' rights issues. And so he was not in favor of racism, but he also wasn't in favor of desegregating schools. He thought each state should do that at their own pace. And so if you're from a much more, I don't want to say racist state, but a state where racism was much more institutionalized, like, say, Alabama versus, say, California, then it's going to be harder and longer for that process to take place. And so Goldwater argues that the only way to fix or have the nation desegregate schools is to have an amendment, right? Because there is no amendment in the Constitution that says schools have to be integrated, right? We have passed laws to that effect, but there isn't a constitutional amendment. And he says that, well, you can't impose these kind of laws nationally. And we do have these arguments to some extent. And so I don't want to get off too much on the side, but basically a lot of people use the states' rights arguments now if you find that problematic with Goldwater's logic for immigration. So one thing to note in this paper is that I'm asking you to recognize that there's always solutions and problems to those solutions. No answer is perfect, even if it's the more morally correct thing to do. So like, why is it okay to argue states' rights with immigration issues and not with, say, segregation issues, right? Are they different enough to where the arguments, doesn't apply? But real politics in real life is hard, so I personally don't like it. I know a lot of you have said you don't like it in class too, so that's okay. We just got to get through the class. The whole amendments work, and you go get good jobs and hire me when I'm homeless. Here we have section 3. So this is actually the easiest part of the paper. It's just a summary component. So again, the book is online for free. I'm still getting emails like, oh, whether people are, I lost my book. It's like, you didn't lose your book. It's online. You've never been using the book if you thought you lost it, right? So download the book. The link is on the syllabus. Um, and so you want to find the section in chapter 2 that talks about how amendments get adopted. There's 2 different ways you have to talk about it. I always in my mind think it's page 52 or 53. It might be like page 58, but it's somewhere in the 50s, I think, where it talks about the way in which amendments get adopted legally into the Constitution. There's a process there. There's 2 different avenues. Make sure you can talk about both. It's not the same as getting a law passed. And in the past, I have had people say like, okay, it goes to veto to the president. It gets 50% of the Congress's vote. That's not how it works. These are much more harder to pass for reasons that you should understand, that you'll be tested on. But it's not the same as a regular law, like raising taxes or something like that. And so when you lay out this summary, this actually probably will be your shortest section as well. You want to make sure you explain it in your own words as well. So tell me what it means. The most important part of section 3 here is it difficult? Why is it difficult to pass? It is. The answer is it is difficult. So you need to be able to explain why it is difficult, what makes it difficult. Do you think given this process that your amendment could pass the required threshold to become law? Why not? Most of you probably should come to the answer that you will not get your stuff passed. So again, like if you want to reform the Second Amendment, like that should be obvious. That's just something that's very at the core of the platforms that we read earlier in the year of the Republican Party. And it doesn't seem like you would be able to get enough votes, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you can give me an argument as to like why you could convince people, even staunch Second Amendment people, why they should change their minds. Is it easy to change people's minds? You don't even need to get into the political stuff. Just think about human nature. Think about your interactions with your friends and family. We've talked about in the past with, like, say, the democratic process. How many of us have been in the situation where you're with 2 or 3 friends and you can't all vote on the same place to go get food? Who wants pizza? Who wants tacos? Who wants a burger? You all want different things, right? So if you can't agree on food, how are you going to agree on abortion rights, right? Again, I know a lot of us are very politically active and are passionate, but all my point and lesson I'm trying to instill from my own personal bias is that these things are much more harder to do in real life, and we should give our neighbors some latitude in their thinking if it just doesn't happen to match ours, even if their views are problematic. There's a difference between extreme immoral views and maybe misinformed views. Or I'm wrong. You can disagree with me. Hopefully I'm that professor where you feel comfortable disagreeing with me. I hated professors, and I hate professors still, strong language, I know, that kind of use their position to make you all feel bad or question your own personal beliefs. It's easy when you agree with a professor, but what if you're that one student who just doesn't want to raise their hand because you find the professor to be overbearing? Hopefully, as we finish up the semester, that was not your experience with me. I hope. That's what I tried. If I'm wrong, email me and give me some advice. Maybe I can change. I probably won't, but maybe I can. So then we move into section 4. So this is the critical thinking component. In this section, briefly write out problems with your proposal, if any. Would it cost too much money to implement? Right. So again, if you want to advocate for an overhaul to the healthcare system, like clearly money is going to be an issue. If you don't understand that, I know a lot of us, even though you might be sad Bernie dropped out of the race, you wanted that free education, right? But it's like that's going to cost money. It's going to cost you money. It's not. There's no such thing as a free education. How would that work? Who's going to pay for these things? These things are difficult. Is your proposal too idealistic? I'm going to make a constitutional amendment against racism. One, that wouldn't count because that's ridiculous. It's a great sentiment, but you're not going to stop people from thinking problematic thoughts. So, if you have something too idealistic, like, a perfect environment, like that might be more attainable, like having a clean environment, but like, could you actually pull it off? Like, could it actually be done? I don't know. Does your amendment violate any other area of the Constitution? So I think that's actually very interesting. Very much think about that. I think another tip with regards to the Constitution, maybe tying into our president's homework, I always forget to talk about whenever I do this assignment, is you can just tweak parts of the Constitution. So for instance, like maybe you want to give Congress people, representatives, more than 2 years in office, because it's like, well, every 2 years you're always worried about getting reelected, so maybe you're going to change it to 4 years. That will require a constitutional amendment. We know presidents now, by law, through constitutional amendment, can only serve 2 terms. That wasn't always the case. Maybe you want to make it 2 5-year terms. Maybe you want to make it 1 year. Maybe you want to have more than one president. So you can just change aspects of the Constitution that you happen to find problematic. So think about that too. What kind of opposition arguments would it, meaning your amendment, likely face? Yeah, so if you argue for something like, well, we need more access to women's health centers so that they can have optional procedures to terminate a pregnancy, like, okay, that's an amendment, that's pretty strong, but there's going to be clear opposition to that. And so a lot of these oppositional points you should just have access to because they're just kind of in the popular media. So think about that. And so, because basically I'm trying to force you all to think critically. I'm basically kind of trying to coerce you to understand views that you might disagree with. And so I'm not saying you have to agree with them. I want you to just be able to articulate the opposition's view. Unfortunately, that's a skill that too many people never learn and lack. And it's unfortunately a skill that even when you go to college, in a great college, people still lack that skill. It baffles me. It's so integral to good philosophical thought, but most people don't like philosophy. So it doesn't surprise me that they lack this ability. And it's like your brain's like a muscle. And these skills are like different workouts for those muscles. And so the more you do it, the easier it is. It's easier for me. I'm still not good at it, but I'm probably a little bit more experienced in thinking this way than many of us in class. So yeah, here, in other words, try to understand the values and perspective that would oppose you. This does not mean you have to agree with them. And explain those views. So basically articulate it. So like, if I say like, well, you're taking my money and my freedom to support something, abortion, if I'm pro-life, that I would not out of my free will support, right? So there's a freedom issue, there's a money issue. Is it a murder issue? I don't know. Abortion's very murky. That's why we still argue about it so much. Some pro-choice people see it, the ability to make choices about your reproductive cycle as an essential human right that promotes essentially biological women's freedom. Very passionate arguments on all sides of the coin there. In this section, think about how your amendment might not serve justice to the extent that you think it does. So in which ways, like, is your amendment not perfect? Are there potential unintended consequences? That's a big one. There's always going to be unintended consequences, so maybe you can think about like what might happen, right? So again, if I did universal health care, maybe an unintended consequence would be like I would bankrupt Social Security or something like that. Like, would there be not enough tax money to pay for this? Could we not pay for the military or something where then we get attacked and it's like, well, okay, now everyone has universal health care, but we're all dead because the Russians invaded us or something like that. If you think there are no problems with your proposal, then explain why that's the case. So again, even with me in writing this, like, well, a lot of you are passionate. You could probably say there's no problems, but you need to be able to explain that view. And then a conclusion in any paper is just an overview of what was just written. So the conclusions are the easiest thing. I highly recommend writing your paper and then going back to do the intro. And then once you've written your paper, you recap or you reiterate everything that you wrote about in the conclusion. Okay, so I have, of course, my famous food for thought, something that'll probably be on the final as well. It's in our chapter, I believe, on domestic policy. Well, I'm just regurgitating that to an extent. So food for thought. Generally, when it is held that the government ought to do something for the people, a standard objection is that this action will lessen freedom. This is because if the government is telling you what to do, like with coronavirus and stay in your house, and then making you do it, even if it improves society, so like that not dying of coronavirus, you as an individual are not free by definition. I can't go to the store. I have to wear a mask. All these different types of things. And so some of you might go, yeah, that's good consequences. Some of us, there are protests, right, might think, no, I'd rather have freedom. I'm responsible. I wash my hands. I'll be careful where I go. You worry about yourself. I'll worry about myself. These are all different. And then people oftentimes hold those views to different degrees. But there's always a but in politics. It also seems to be the case that without certain minimum resources, people are not free to pursue their own desires regardless. For instance, if I die of a preventable childhood illness, then I never grow up to be an adult and use my freedom to go to college. If I go to Chipotle and my neighbor gets me sick because they have coronavirus and then I die, right, because the government didn't institute social distancing, then how free am I? So this is this kind of classic argument about like what freedom means, how does it work, and then that gets itself expressed in the amendments. And are the amendments securing freedom or preventing freedom, right? So if you're anti-Second Amendment, you might go, yeah, like it actually ruins people's freedoms, right? Because people die of guns. But if I'm a pro-gun person, I'm like, well, I never killed anyone. I'm not going to murder anyone. It promotes my freedom because when someone breaks into my house, I can preserve my life and my family's life, so it increases my freedom. Who's right? They're both right. That's the problem. That's what a lot of us fail to recognize. Usually everyone's right and everyone's wrong at the same time, and then that's why I just pull my hair out. I was like, just leave me alone. I don't care. No one knows. No one knows. So this is one of the last videos of the semester. I'm starting to lose it in my quarantine. I put on a collared shirt for you guys, look a little more fancy. Email me questions with regards to the video. I'm going to upload it right now, so I'll post it in the announcements as well. And yeah, please work on this. You have essentially just over 2 weeks to work on it. Work on it. It's very, very important. A lot of your grades need to go up and start studying for the final. So I'll have another video, probably do it tomorrow because I'm not having a good day today. I'm just like, I just don't want to work. I'm lazy. I'll do it tomorrow, and that'll be about showing you like good and bad writing, basically. And that was for next week, but I will just post it this week so you all can see it and start working on the paper. So adios. Have good quarantining, and I will see you guys hopefully on campus at some point if you're still there when we're allowed back on campus. So